Thanks everyone for coming here today. My name is Perry Hewitt, and I'm here with my colleague Irene Greif to talk about MOOCs as the new marketing, how learning drives engagement and connection. Irene, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Oh, hi. We had agreed we'd introduce ourselves. We're then going to sort of take turns on different chunks of the talk. I'm Irene Greif. I am a computer scientist by training, but my work over most of my career has been at the intersection of computer science and social science, looking at collaboration. When I moved from MIT to Lotus, I thought I would become a product person, but started a research group there, which I then merged into IBM Research when IBM acquired us. And we have invented in our research team most of the technologies that you'd see in the IBM connections in the social products and the learning products from the company.
Great, and I'm Perry Hewitt, and I have worked at the intersection of marketing, technology, publishing, and learning for most of my career at places like Houghton Mifflin and Simon & Schuster, also briefly crossed paths with Irene at Lotus Development, and help large organizations, now Harvard, think about how technology affects they communicate and engage with others. And increasingly, that means more about MOOCs. So, quick pop quiz. Who knows what a MOOC is? Do we have any brave volunteers? Oh, that's pretty good. It's about half.
The hands went down when it sounded like.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So that's about half of people who have been exposed to it. Has anyone here taken a MOOC? Smaller group.
Oh.
Anyone complete one? Well, that's not always the right metric, but that's an interesting fact. And can you think of some ways MOOCs might be connected to marketing? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Hopefully you'll know by the end, but maybe we can get a few ideas. Thanks.
So the freemium model,
Mm-hmm.
where you have, let's say, 15,000 people taking bench validating classes at University of Entrepreneurship. And some of them might say they want a transcript, that might be $50. Or some of them might say they want to be able to tell future employers about it, that might be a certificate that might cost more. So that would be an example. Another, your marketing teacher there.
Yep, spreading that information. Any others? Yeah?
Well, it seems like there's an obvious compliance problem. That's the term we would use in the pharmaceutical world. Completion of the program, start to end.
Right. So issues to iron out. So here's a great slide Irene found on the different aspects of a MOOC. I'm falling apart here. The massive, I think, is a really important point about that because we're creating a large data set and large number of learners, and you can interact with those in a variety of ways. Open, think about open registration. And open can also mean, when you open a course to the world, do you think about that openness as being people from Bangladesh next to people from Wayland? Or do you also think about that as organizing people by different learning cohorts? Let's say all people between 15 and 20, or women in a certain age group, or people from different geographies. And courses, how do you even think about what a course is? So I think there are a lot of different ideas around what learning is. I know at Harvard we're wrestling with what's a module, what's a course, what's a lesson. And I think we'll all struggle, both on the learning and the marketing side, to define and redefine those terms. One thing we do know, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Gartner's hype cycle, where you talk about sort of the hype in computing. This is Google search terms worldwide for the term MOOC over the last couple of years. So you can see there's hugely heightened interest, in figuring out what one is, what it might mean for your educational organization, what might mean for you as a learner, and what it might mean for your business. Why is this interest so sudden, and why is it so intense? Well, I think, unless you've been really under a rock, that higher education faces tremendous challenges around price. People inside and outside of higher education are concerned, thinking there's got to be a better way. Second is thinking about the realization of the internet's promise. I was joking with a colleague that if I lost my iPhone and you picked it up, you'd be like, who is this super intellectual marathoner who lost her iPhone? Because all my apps are so aspirational, right? They're all about the person I want to be, not necessarily the person I am day to day. But I think about that in terms of realizing the internet's promise. All the information's knowledge is now available to you. I think if you ask someone in 1961 who wasn't working on DARPA what that would mean, they would say, well, everyone would read all the works of Shakespeare and everyone would know advanced mathematics. But is a MOOC way to realize that gap between all the information that's out there and the amount we as individuals are assimilating that's both useful and makes us an informed populace? And finally, the idea of the supreme sexiness of scale. I remember when one of the startups in the online learning space started their first MOOC, and $160,000 in the classroom, 160,000 people in a classroom was the metric people went back to over and over. And I think a gentleman from Princeton said, my entire career, I couldn't have taught that many students as I could have in that first class. I think that's the same person who 3 years later said, you know what, MOOCs aren't for me. I'm going to look at other ways to think about online learning. What are some of the big drivers behind MOOCs and why people are looking to learn online? Well, this is a picture of my son who graduated from high school a couple of years ago. And I was, in that maternal moment of, can I show you how to tie a bow tie for your graduation? And he looked at me like I was vaguely impaired. And those of you with teenagers will know they usually look at you like you're vaguely impaired. But he said, I can look that up on YouTube. Like, why on earth would I go to a human to give me that piece of information when someone is going to explain it far better to me in a 3-minute video clip? And it's just a different sense of how people learn online. Within his lifetime, certainly his lifetime as a learner, does anyone know who this is? Yep, Sal Khan. Sal Khan, who's originally started a series of educational videos. I think it was to help nieces and nephews with homework help. It was not to have a world domination play in online education, which is what he ended up with. But it was videos to support independent learning. So it's a different world in terms of the role video plays, in terms of how we impart information and expect to be able to get information from video. And who's watching video? The whole damn world, pretty much. 56% of the US online population, 73% of internet users. It's the growth in video consumption as we all have multiple screens is really a new normal in terms of how we behave in terms of video and getting information. The number 1 and 2 top categories of video people are consuming are comedy at 57% of all online video and educational videos at 50%. So that surprised me. I would have gone for a bunch of more categories before I went for education, but the desire to learn things online and to get information that way gets ever bigger. And the obligatory mobile slide, because I'm obsessed with mobile, and I think this really drives a lot of our consumption patterns. Jonah Peretti from BuzzFeed famously said, mobile used to be where video went to die. Now mobile is where video goes to take off. And I think that's really true for marketing and educational purposes as well, that the idea that previously all that dead time that you had, commuting on the train, even, this is how I'm going to die, I know this, walking places while watching video, or, having video in your kitchen, or, I've even seen people watching, the game in bars together on these tiny handhelds. It's changing the way and the number of opportunities for people to consume content using video. Let's segue just very briefly into, Harvard's efforts with HarvardX and edX, which is the large consortium that it formed with MIT about a year and a half ago to think about MOOCs and online learning. MOOCs are part of the answer, right? But it's a small subset of all the online educational opportunities that we'll be talking about here today and thinking through. We're really trying to think about HarvardX, which is Harvard's courses through edX, as more than a MOOCs, but an effort to really transform how we think about learning, to think about how we teach better, given that kids are saying, sure, I can learn it on YouTube. What does that mean for how we think about teaching and using teaching time? Thinking about what does it mean to have an interactive learning experience? Is that necessarily interaction between an individual and a computer, or an interaction between an individual and another individual mediated by technology? How we think about positioning the role of instructional resources and experts, and building a community of research around what we do. And I think there's a lot of porous walls between higher education in terms of learning about online learning and large corporations, organizations, and institutions thinking about getting the information that they need to their prospects, customers, and large employee bases. So, what's new about MOOCs and learning? It's still a huge market, in education and beyond. It'll continue to iterate. I think organizations interested in marketing are going to take the best practices from groups like Khan, and the TED Talks, which I read today, has over 1 billion views of TED Talks, and think about what does that mean for marketing and communications. Universities or organizations of all kinds are already investing in 2 separate streams generally. They're investing a lot in training and learning, and they're investing in their sort of social blueprint and social media measurement. But I think the next thing, and I think MOOCs are going to be one of the forces behind this, is those 2 things are going to start to come together into a more holistic strategy. So I'm going to turn it over to Irene to talk a little bit about how does one learn.
Okay. Before I start to tell you how I think people learn, I would like to ask all of you to just find a neighbor, turn to somebody, and explain one memorable, happy learning experience in your life. And I'll try to give you enough time to be able to, each tell each other. I'm told people really feel good after they do this. Go do this. Yeah. They're talking. I don't see. Oh, I see somebody not talking over there. Two people not talking. One of them left. If anyone has only listened, take your turn to tell your story. Make sure it goes both ways. Oh, it's quieting down. Good. And I'm sure the person in back I see typing is texting with somebody to exchange stories. Has there been enough time? Anybody frustrated if we stop it? Okay. How many people told stories of sitting all by themselves, just figuring something out all by themselves? Good. How many of you told stories where somebody else was involved, a great mentor, a great teacher, a great something, a peer? Anybody hear such a good story that you'd like to repeat it? Not tell your own, but tell somebody else's story? What? Oh, you want to tell your own. Get her to tell yours. No? Okay, I didn't really think I'd have a taker on that, but I thought I'd try. Oh, you will? Okay. Okay. You could go to a mic if you'd like.
Was it when I showed you how to use a video camera?
I was going to ask the other person to tell it.
So Steve, yesterday, he learned by moderating on Google Glasses, and he learned from experiencing the excitement that developers, they were explorers. So that was an exciting way for him to learn. That's when you peripherally a little bit about it.
I love to run panel sessions. I agree with you, yes. Okay. And did I see one story here that was good enough to tell? Yes. Getting choked up, yes, okay. Good, thank you very much. I won't put anyone else on the spot, but I think it will end up kind of proving the point, anticipating the point that we're going to emphasize social learning. The way people learn is through social learning. There is, a meaning to educational theorists, and I like to make sure I start from that before I just flip over to ordinary language use of the term. But the man credited with starting the field of social learning said that, had a whole bunch to say about how hazardous it could be if everybody tried to learn by themselves, which we could get into or not. I would skip over that too. Fortunately, most human behavior is learned observationally through modeling. That was the beginning, but in fact, over time, educators have been doing studies and have come to understand that people learn better when they model other people's behaviors, when they have discussions, when they create and co-create, when they teach, when they get tutored. And part of the reason I asked you to tell someone else's story is to get a little of that experience. One of my favorite results from education research is that it might just feel like common knowledge to you that, of course, if you got tutored, if you got personal attention from somebody who was trying to help you understand, you would learn better. But in fact, people who watch videos of somebody tutoring somebody else learn better. So there's just something about human participation and engagement that makes a difference in how people learn. Asking and answering questions will help as well. What this ends up meaning to me is that it's kind of okay to let notions of social software, social media, social business get confounded with social learning. We don't have to be too formal about it. And in fact, when you look carefully, and we who have been doing work on social software and businesses are starting to realize that modern businesses run on social learning. For instance, in a system, anything that's just in time, don't try to read the screen, but this is a question and answer system where if you ask a question, it will be rooted to individuals who have the right expertise and the right personality type for you, or to a community. But this kind of system could be thought of as a crutch. You'll never have to learn anything. You'll just always ask people. But in fact, if you articulate a question or have it the answer explained to you by somebody who is good at explaining to you, and then you use the information right away. Most of these systems are mobile devices being put on in hands of salespeople who need to get help while they're trying to close a deal. You use the information right away, a very useful learning technique. And you could go through most social technologies in use in the private world, in consumer world, and in businesses, and see that there are actually very good learning practices being supported by the technologies. So this could lead you to just say, we're trying to get marketing messages, start to use forums, wikis, all these technologies that you're using in your company to run your business, use them as part of your marketing outreach. You may all be doing it. How many of you are doing this already? Oh, not that many. I was afraid you'd already be doing this, maybe thinking it's your content marketing, but great. Then we'll talk more about how to do that, but I wanted to tie it back into MOOCs because while you can be doing this in a very generic way, inside and outside your company, with MOOCs, you get a very engaging sort of anchor, a context for the collaboration, for the socializing, for the forums, for the wikis. And we see this with MOOCs already, that they are very social and becoming more social. Some of it's sort of by accident. MOOCs are huge. Teachers can't grade all the papers. So many MOOCs, most MOOC technologies include peer grading support. So people in the class grade each other's work. You'll get a certain number by default. If you get into it and really like it, you could get more papers to grade. You get guidance on how to think about assignments. And it turns out when you think about assignments as a grader, you really get different insight than you would as the person trying to do the assignment. So as a result of this need to support a teacher, peer grading technology is part of MOOCs. And getting back to Perry's point about Harvard wanting to know how to actually enhance on-campus learning as well as distance learning, there are people now in non-massive classes who are taking advantage of this technology to make it easier for students to get a peer grading experience. Sometimes by design. So all this video on the web, Khan Academy for one, and many others, is being used for teachers to change the way they teach and ask students and expect students to listen to the lecture before they come to class, and in class participate in conversations, in problem solving. This is a picture of a room at MIT, the Teal Room, where there's really a physical support, a new kind of classroom to make it easy for people to do work together once they come to class. The technology is enabling this. The technology for actually doing the problem solving is not great yet, but we're seeing more attempts to be great at that online so that you can actually have that flipped experience even if you never get together. But in fact, one of the changes coming about because of MOOCs and because of the massive amount of video on the web is that on-campus experiences are going in this direction. And well, Salman Khan, among others, would say that he just doesn't expect to see lectures happening anymore in 5 years on any major campus. Some MOOCs are kind of talking heads. This is MIT's computer science course. And it's suited for some people. But even that course has forums associated with it. So that's the social component. Some are social by design. So by contrast, MIT's computer science course, the introductory computer science course at Harvard, is taught in Sanders Theater. It's very theatrical. And when it's filmed to be put on the web, that whole theater experience is captured so that you could get a sense of when kids in the class are standing up to be counted in binary and stuff like that. So it's giving you a sense of the social process and trying to share the excitement in what's turning out to be an amazingly successful class. It's taken by both computer science majors and non-computer science majors, and both come out of it with what they want. It's good enough to be a start in real computer science, and it's fun and entertaining and educational for everyone. And this final one is kind of in that spirit. It's a new experiment we're doing at IBM. This is Ginny Rometty, our chairman and CEO. We are having a Think Academy one Friday every month, first Friday. We'll pick a topic that everyone in the company really should know more about. And if you think at all about how fast skills requirements are changing in companies, you know that companies still need to think about these kinds of things, even if they're trying to cut down on expenses of face-to-face and traditional styles of corporate training. So what Ginny's doing here is giving a talk in a classroom with people who are very excited to be with her, learning about the cloud. This was a cloud computing topic. She had guest speakers. There were little chunks, just like in a MOOC. There was an online discussion when this was done worldwide live, and she takes questions from an iPad from the online discussion. But it was designed to be recorded and reused, and people have been reading it, going back to it over the month since it was first broadcast. About a quarter of the company probably was on for the first live one, and about another quarter over the month to the next one. And we do have a plan and are thinking about ways to use this material outside. And I think it will be very powerful for marketing. It really gets employees engaged. Actually, another question I'd meant to ask is how many of you, you're all in marketing, I assume, but how many of you think about internal marketing as part of your job? Oh, great. OK, because I think HR, things that you might think of as human resources actually, I think, need to be attended to with a marketing point of view. And this really makes everybody feel great about our leader, about our company, and so on. And I think that these materials used outside can be part of an important external marketing program as well. And I think that as internal training goes in this direction, we'll see more opportunities to do that. So just one last thing I want to say about MOOCs before turning this back to Perry is MOOCs are capturing tons of data. In fact, the people at Harvard, at virtually any school that's doing MOOCs, they don't even know what to do with the data. The people who are the data analysts are saying, professors, tell me what question you want to ask. I'll help you answer it. But I have every keystroke, every click stream from every course. It's a huge amount of data, but we need to know what to ask. It's more information and more contextualized information than you're all probably trying to make sense of from Twitter. I'm sure you're all doing sentiment analysis and trying to understand your customers that way. But what the opportunity here is to get over this worry about completion rates, although there was a very interesting observation about compliance and relationship to pharmaceutical issues, and I would like to get back to that. But this is a sample display of information about MOOCs. Very big MOOCs, 200,000 at the bottom, a little smaller towards the top, but the orange are completion rates, and virtually all of them are well under 10%. And everybody worries about that. And even when they look at social, it'll be to say, well, if they participated in the forum, they were more likely to complete. If they got through the second exam, then they're serious. The ones who get through a second exam are have higher completion rate. Is that really what the point is? What chunks? What if people didn't ever want to complete? What if they're like me? I go to MOOCs so that I could learn what the MOOCs are. If I take a MOOC, I found my favorite feature. Most important feature in any MOOC, from my point of view, is the speed up the video feature. And I'm up to usually 2x, sometimes 1.5. But I wanted to know, and I wanted to see the difference between CS50 and MIT's course, and I didn't need to take more than the beginning. So, what is it that somebody's there for? If they're there to jump around, what are they jumping to? What could you learn about your customers if you understood what they do and don't understand about concepts that might matter to whether they would embrace or buy your product? So I'm going to leave this as rhetorical questions because Perry is going to talk to you about engagement now.
So engagement's kind of the new elusive metric. And I call it elusive because I've done a really good job of coming up with 3 or 4 really good engagement metrics, which after 3 months, everyone says, that's not really working. Let's come up with another one. I think it's really challenging because what we're moving from is command and control marketing. I grew up, in part at Lotus. We had a little yellow book of brand. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And we even had a wall of shame that showed you when people were not using the little yellow book of brand. So this was like command and control extraordinaire, and we were pretty good at it. But now we need to think about how are people engaging with our content, how are we working with people, and how do we use their engagement and learning to improve the products and services we offer them so that we become more valuable to them and move up the food chain. So one thing is there are a lot of new technologies that enable social, that enable scale, that just didn't exist 15 years ago. But the impetus and the need pretty much did. So I was actually going through some drawers in my house and found these old Razorfish reports and put one on Twitter, and that was Shiv Singh's first big report, which I think was Why Intranets Matter or something like that. And I was like, wow, I found this in the Wayback Machine, and put it on Twitter. So it just sort of blew me away that I still had these things. But it was part of an initiative led by the then CEO of Razorfish, a guy named Bob Lord, who's now at AOL Networks. And he was talking about how do we institute Razorfish 2.0. That was before anyone said Web 2.0. This is around the year 2000. Saying how do we think about Razorfish going from a boutique agency that gives you your first website, and it was largely static websites, to being an agency, we're already at that point established to be the agency people call it if they wanted a high-end website. But how do we get to help people think about more difficult business problems? Well, first of all, we should help them learn about more difficult business problems and how solutions, whether those were intranets or we were really into portals back then, would be part of the solution to them. So we did launch this series of light papers, and it was pretty successful. Each of these in this Venn diagram could have about 15 bullets or 20 bullets in each section. But I want to put it up as an example of where I think the overlap is. We think a lot at Harvard in digital communications and engagement about content strategy. How do we take the approved, sanctioned, interesting research content we have? How do we take the moments that occur only at Harvard? And how do we put them into context in a way that's shareable and informative and interesting? So our goals there around connections, sparking discussion, and I shouldn't say amuse as much as evoking emotions. How many of you are familiar with a company called Upworthy? Yeah, so you're familiar with the idea of content marketing as a way to evoke emotions. Upworthy is a company that I think they recently got very heavily funded that sends out short, compelling videos. And it often opens with a question. Have you noticed that? They'll say, do you think racism is bad, or do you support drowning kittens? Usually there's not a lot of leeway in 2 credible responses. So I usually support drowning the kittens just to see what'll happen, but they show me the video anyway. But it's a way to evoke emotion and spark conversation. It's part of very deliberate content strategy. That's what that company does. But I would argue, all of us are somewhat in the business of that content strategy. We're all content companies. We're all media companies. And then in terms of thinking about learning, you're more in the business of teaching, assessing, credentialing, doing many, many more complex things than alluded to there. But there's a big overlap in terms of engagement and building community. And I think both parts can learn from the other. And that's why I'm glad to be involved, on the learning side with edX HarvardX and bring some of the marketing sensibilities and really think those lines are very, very porous these days. So I wanted to do a brief case study of someone I think is doing it really well. How many of you had heard that Google Analytics or Google was launching a MOOC? So just a few of you. So on October 1st, they put out a big announcement saying, we're putting out our first MOOC. This is not Google's first foray into teaching people how to use its products online. They've had that Google Analytics certificate, I would venture, for 5 or 6 years, where you pay $50 and you do a bunch of online lessons. But what have they done differently for this? So one, they're using the M in MOOC. They're going really massive. So they're saying, they've marketed it, through TechCrunch, through all these different areas to say, get it to a much larger audience. And they're investing more in a formal course structure, which is clearly, derives from a lot of the stuff that the big online course MOOC providers are doing. They have a goal to get people more well-versed in their tools and also provide Google with a giant data set in terms of how people are learning. If you think it's valuable to Google to have the analytics on all our websites, that's already like a given, right? But imagine if they watch me fumble around between visits or click with that new ABC they have, behavior, collaboration, whatever those ABCs are, as I'm mousing around and trying to figure out where's content now and how do I look at that? That's really valuable to them to watch how I learn. So that's a big opportunity. Another thing they're doing is it takes full advantage, and this will not apply to every company everywhere, but I think some of the lessons are transferable. Not every company has Google Groups, builds Google Groups. Not every company has Google Hangouts, which are the two technologies here. But what they can do is see how people are learning and how people are moving asset to asset. So for example, if I'm putting up a story in the Harvard Gazette and I have one YouTube video and I show that to half the sample size and one Kaltura video, I might learn something about how people like to consume online content. Similarly with the MOOCs, any company can do this and say, if I offer a discussion forum at this point for these students and at a later point for other students, what might the different benefit be? What might it teach me about how people want to engage with my content? So what are 4 takeaways from this MOOC program they've just launched? First of all, it's an opportunity for scale, right? I grew up doing focus groups, one-on-one customer interviews, a lot of qualitative, and sure, occasionally we do this giant brand surveys. I did one at Harcourt. We did one at Lotus or IBM, the global brand survey where you flew people around. But this is a real opportunity to get scale. Scale, market research, if you will, depending on how you design it, to understand more of your constituencies and how they're using your products. Also, I think there's an opportunity to really embrace social learning and learn about other behaviors that would help the rest of your social media marketing by adding these synchronous interactive sessions. I found it really interesting when I talked to a couple of colleagues who are taking the MOOC that they talked about the perception of, well, if it's online, we can do it anytime, right? We can read it anytime. And Google has deliberately narrowed some of those windows to say, to get online help, go on at this time. And I think that's very smart, because it prompts a lot of synchronous behaviors and so they can observe social learning and how it's working. Using community tools drives learners to engagement opportunities after the course, really trying to build up those communities on those channels. So that would apply to any company, right? If, for example, you decided G+ was how you were going to serve up your learning materials and how you were going to convene people through a Hangout, then later you might still have those audiences and be able to engage with them afterwards for, to upsell the new product or talk about a new initiative. And finally, to Irene's point, that analyzing the data can not only inform how you teach what you are doing, but your overall engagement strategy, not only through a MOOC learning type environment, but through any of your social media marketing, any of your traditional marketing, and even brand messaging and positioning. Social learning customers?
I guess.
That's you.
Okay. So what I'd like to do here is look at ways you might get your customers, internal and external, more engaged through learning. And I'm going to give some examples that are sort of broadly learning, not literally MOOCs, but we'll touch on MOOCs a couple of times as well. I will turn to you again at the end, we both will, to ask you about other things you might want to get from trying to use learning as part of your marketing strategy. But the ones that I'd like to look at are ways of better understanding your customers, making your products more understandable, and developing your current or future workforce through marketing kinds of outreach. So first, again, not exactly a MOOC, but a gaming approach, and games are being used more and more for learning. This is a serious game for understanding your customer. It's called the bucket list game. We designed this, didn't build it, but designed it for conversations with a customer from a financial company. One of the challenges that they have at a company that's trying to sell people financial offerings, particularly for retirement, is that people are not usually very articulate or clear about what they want to do in their retirement, and therefore aren't able to think about, envision, or even have you help them explain what money they need. And when you try to think about how much money do I need to retire, it's a puzzle. So this game is designed to get people to, first of all, think about their dream, explain one or more, and then, without getting into details of the game, this person has a dream of opening a clam chowder shack in Cape Cod, but it becomes a card game where there's give and take back and forth. The person puts down this goal and then gets suggestions from other players, people in the company, who will suggest you might need to go to culinary school, you might need to understand how to run a small business, you might need to understand how to get insurance. So a whole lot of things that would help you understand how to do this business, make you feel good about thinking through your dream, and gives the person back at the company a lot of information about you that you would not have been able to tell them. So here's an example of a learning experience, a game-like learning experience, and one that really is helping you figure out how to help your customers. Next one. This is, actually it's not, as screenshots often are, it's not that easy to see. This is from 23andMe. How many people know what 23andMe is? How many people have spit? One, okay, should be two, okay. So 23andMe is a direct-to-consumer website for genetics analysis. We're finding out what's in your DNA, and you spit in a test tube, you send it to them, and they send you back a fascinating profile of known markers. There are some that are considered scary to know about, and you have to say, I really want to know about that one before they reveal it. There are others that are not so scary. I have blue eyes, they could tell me. And then there are a whole lot of things that are sort of traits that tend to be correlated with aspects of your DNA makeup. And in fact, one of their challenges, even though not a whole bunch of us, a few of us are interested enough to subscribe to this, most of us don't understand that much about genetics, don't really know what we're getting for this value. We play with it a little bit and then forget about it. And they're constantly trying to educate people, make the information useful, and in fact, make more use of the data they have. So one of the things they like to do is survey people and understand what correlations they might be able to discover between does your urine smell after you eat asparagus? What can we say about that? Do you take certain kinds of medications? Do your feet itch when you do X, Y, Z? Just random things, but they are able, with a huge database of people's genetic makeup, to start to hypothesize some things at least, and they can't get people to do surveys. So what they've invented is you've seen these other places probably, but they're using very well little mini surveys that are kind of addictive and game-like also. So you fill in, you answer a question, you immediately see how you stack up against everybody else in their growing and pretty large database of interesting people. And they're getting more information that they do need. Now, this is also, you'll see in MOOCs, every 10 minutes or so, you'll get asked questions. It's partly to see if you're paying attention. But if you started using MOOCs as your outreach and marketing program, you could mix in with the questions, the are you paying attention questions, and and something you want to know for your company. And even are you paying attention or are you getting this notion could be something that you want to know. You might want to know whether people are not understanding a basic concept that would keep them from appreciating your product. You're doing low energy light bulbs and everybody's complaining that they take too long to get bright. Well, if people understood why and that it's worth it, maybe they'd be okay. So how do you get people to understand the things that will make them feel good about your product? So the mini surveys, I think, is a concept. Instead of talking about developing your workforce, this is a little bit still on the game theme. So this is Kevin Verbach. He teaches at the Wharton School of Business, started 2 years ago to teach a gamification course on the theory that it is going to matter much more to businesses to understand how to use games and game techniques in their everyday business. So this is just a particular screenshot when he's explaining tic-tac-toe. But the reason that I wanted to show this is that are multiple. Yes, people in your workforce need to be learning new things. You don't have to develop all the materials. You may find the ones you want are out on the web in MOOCs already. In fact, when I discovered this course and started talking about it with a few people inside IBM, quite a few of us decided we would start a little forum inside IBM and support each other taking the course. And it ended up being a very interesting mix of using the outside resource, but being able to discuss relevance to our work, and also, because we knew each other, keep each other at it. And while I said we shouldn't just think about completion rates, we were way over 10%. I was going to go back and didn't check before I came here. My apologies, but we were well over 10% completion rate. And for me personally, I still have never completed a course, but I got much further in this course. I experienced peer grading. So what I told you about peer grading came from going further in this course because my peers actually went further and were talking about the tests and the assignments and so on. So I think that mix, either for employees in order to leverage the external material, or if you want to think about an approach to learning that's external that might not take as much investment as building a whole course, thinking about having that forum sponsored on your site complementing a course so that people could be discussing it, but with other people and with people from your company who would have a little more context from your business that would help interpret what they're learning. Last one, developing your future workforce. So this is a picture from the P-Tech school in Brooklyn, in Bedford-Stuyvesant. Anybody hear about this school by any chance? They actually were kind of shocked early this year to be rocketed to fame when they were mentioned in Obama's State of the Union address. And a few people have copied them since. They're a school in a very economically challenged neighborhood. And IBM has gone in to work with them to develop a curriculum that will take kids through high school and an associate's degree with emphasis on skills needed to get a job in the computer industry. They are a sub-school within a vocational high school. And we send in mentors, so this is somebody from IBM mentoring a student there, and work with them in a way that is really changing their lives and changing their prospects for employment and for completion of a degree in school. What's interesting to me here is how much the social component matters, but how hard it is to scale this up. And we need to be moving these things online. I think that a number of the things that we've talked about up to now, the fact that companies are designing materials to keep upgrading their own skills internally, that those skills could be published externally, and that other people could then take advantage of them, I think will start to be a way to develop your future workforce. That instead of having these very high touch is very nice, and if we could get mentors into schools, I love it. But in addition to that, I think that we need, businesses need to be doing this. We hear all the time about the skills gap and how hard it is for businesses to hire people who are finishing school. Our governor in this state, I don't know if everybody's local or just a lot of local people, but our governor will say, we have 250,000 unemployed people, we have 250,000 jobs unfilled. What's wrong with this picture? So in order to start fixing that, I think we need companies to be reaching out in a marketing-like way with materials that simply give people skills, but also materials that help people understand you want to work for me, or you want to work in this industry, you want to stay with the STEM fields, you want to stay in science and technology. Really marketing the skills needed for your industry so that you will be able to hire and will be able to find people choosing to knock on your door and say, I want a job here, and training themselves better before they do knock on your door. So I think that really important global problem, and it's different from country to country, but you hear it everywhere. You'll hear in Africa, we can't find anyone with management skills. You'll hear in other places, you can't find anyone with web skills, something as specific as that. And you constantly hear people don't have analytics skills. So anyone who could be helping with that, you'll be helping yourselves, and it really can be a part of how you think about what marketing should be about in the future. So with that, I think, give it back to you.
No, I think marketing in particular is facing a giant skills gap now. I always say I'm horrified when graduates of terrific liberal arts colleges will come in, my office and say, a little more context than this, but marketing's great because I don't really like math. And, I have to say, here's the really terrible news, marketing is math, and math is the most important thing you do in marketing. So I think it's, as marketing shifts from being largely intuition-based and cultural norms and broad-scale assumptions, and there's still a role, tremendously important role for creativity and ideation. This is not to say we're all metrics and data-driven from now on forward. But I do think the shape of marketing is very much changing, and the skills gap is huge. So the fact that Google launched a MOOC for Google Analytics just made my hiring 5 years out much easier, because it will be another way to differentiate, another way to credential, and another way for smart peers to find one another and to build communities where people can continue to be hired. So going back to this idea of shaping your learning and your outreach strategy, I think pretty few people will have the resources in this room or in this world to launch a full-blown MOOC. But what are some of the strategies you can implement today and start? So we went back through the deck and thought about, what are things you could do with what's out there? What can you take back to your office next week and say, these are some learning techniques that might be useful to us? One is leverage existing. I loved Irene's example of taking a course together, existing MOOC products to create a forum for customers or employees. I think Think Academy is amazing, but that's a huge level of effort. That's the CEO of IBM's involvement. That's a big lift. I think there are many ways to take courses. It's happening organically in our own office with students, staff electing to take the Google Analytics MOOC together. But are there ways within your teams or in your customer communities and forums where you can create learning opportunities with stuff that's already there? How-to videos. I think this is huge. There's a company, a colleague of mine just joined, called Allego, which is about video sales training, peer-to-peer sales training, use iPads and video. I think this is a huge growth opportunity. And I think even if, my team were better about doing small things like, here's how we, develop an email marketing program, or here's how we begin to think about optimizing for mobile for this kind of website. Just small videos, which I think initially will probably live within your organization, but could take on a life beyond the organization. I see, Steve, if you're still here, you're a pro at this. This is, thinking about how you do how-to videos that explain things to people, that, broaden it out. And finally, to mine social content within and beyond the company. And I don't mean creepy mining, I mean helpful mining of, what are the things that people opt into, and it doesn't have to be through a specific tool like a Yammer. But within, what are people talking about on your online communities? What are they referencing when they talk about your company? What are the insights you can derive? And then what are the learning opportunities around that social content? And how can you create more of them? Thank you all very much for coming today.